Welcome to our 6th annual PR Women Who Changed History event. My name is Jenny Frankel, Associate Director at the Museum of Public Relations. On behalf of the museum, thank you so much for tuning in this evening for our very special event, highlighting stories of fierce women leaders in public relations, past and present. This year, we are excited to also have a panel of students and young professionals who will reflect on tonight's event after the last presentation. And this will be in lieu of a Q&A with our presenters. Feel free to share comments and network with one another in the chat box throughout the show, and use the Q&A box during our final segment to ask your burning questions. Tonight's program is packed with rich history and vital conversations that paint the pictures of strength, resilience, and ambition over the years and even present day. Although women make up most of the PR industry, there are still many issues to overcome. A huge warm thank you to our sponsors for making this event possible. We would love to extend a huge thank you to the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Georgia, Johnson & Johnson, the Bonnie Yablon Foundation, TV One, Renew PR, Page, Hunter, Pat Ford, the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management, Race Point Global, Experian, APCO Worldwide, Jim Lukachevsky, Germander and Associates, Muckrack, and Compro. Now, I'd like to invite our MC, Karen Medved, to the stage. Karen is a professor of corporate communication and a master's program director at Baruch College at the City University of New York. I had the pleasure of seeing Karen in action at this same event in 2020, right before lockdown. So it is a pleasure for me to be sharing this virtual stage with you today. Welcome, Karen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. I remember that event so well, being downtown in the WeWork and being hosted there, and just how times have changed.
Well, we can do an elbow bump.
Yeah, there we go. I like
virtually,
that.
just to relive that night again. But thank you again for hosting this event once more.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Absolutely. Well, I get a distinct honor if I could have Marjorie Krauss join us on camera. Wonderful. So wonderful. So I am just really thrilled to get a chance to just have a couple of minutes with Marjorie, and we need to thank her because it's very early in the morning for her. She's in Dubai at the moment, and she is the founder and chief executive chairman of APCO Worldwide. Just truly a trailblazer for women in the industry for over 35 years. Just phenomenal. So welcome. What an honor to have you with us tonight.
Well, it's my pleasure, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just thinking, Marjorie, the other day when I was thinking about this conversation we were going to have, what a time in the world it is to have it, right? With all that's going on, I think about the complex world of government relations, public affairs, international and multinational organizing that you have navigated for all these years. It's a challenging space.
It's a very challenging space, and I think it makes you feel personally connected to a lot of these events. So it's been a very sad and difficult week to navigate for me, because our second office for APCO, surprisingly, was Moscow in 1988. And I just walked in and set up a company and got to know a lot of the people. And those were the people kind of who led that period of time when Russia was looking, starting to look west. And we've also been very involved in Ukraine. And I just see the people's faces flashing when I see these terrible accounts on television. So our hearts go out to that very troubled region.
Yes, and a great deal of respect that I have for the kinds of work that you've done all these years. Like in 1984, you think of a woman, right, in 1984, beginning this kind of a company that really was going into these issues. At that time, it must have been a challenging and exhilarating time to be a woman in the industry.
Well, one of the things that happens is, when you're young, you don't always think about what you're doing and what you're up against. You just do it, right? And I think that, I don't know if it's fear that makes you keep going,
Mhm.
or fear of failure, or whether, it's just pure desire. But I've been very blessed that not only I started then, but that I was able to find people to come along on the journey who were smarter than I was. And, we worked together and we built something really great.
Yeah. And you're also, if I'm getting this correct, one of the largest woman-owned business in the industry?
We are. I think we were probably the largest globally, actually, at this point, and it's majority women owned because we have an employee shareholding as well. So I think one of my goals was, when we did this, was to make sure that it was a very good and safe place for women in the industry, and that if you worked hard, that you were going to be not only fairly treated, but there were no limits to what you could do. And that was, it's an important part of who APCO is and what APCO is. And I hope that its legacy is going to be a proof point that when men and women work together without limits, that there are no limits, and that you can really accomplish something great.
Absolutely. It makes me think of when I was taking a look again at the APCO website. I love the first of your organizational values, boldness. I just love that that's number one right there. That says so much about how you have navigated the industry over these years and your love for that sense of breaking boundaries.
Well, it was almost a little bit like David and Goliath in some ways, because people would look at what I was doing and look at me and say, yeah, right, this is really, and if the women are listening to this, I would say what I learned was never to underestimate the power of being underestimated. And that really drove a lot of things, because people would look and say, that'll never work. And then, they turned around, and the next thing they knew, we were like the biggest in that market especially as we went globally, because whatever difficulties there were in the US at that time, you can imagine going around the globe and doing this as a woman in some places where there were very few women doing in the industry, not just on the public relations side, but also the public affairs side.
Absolutely. And doing that as a woman, as the founder of an organization, and also as a mother. And I love, if people haven't had a chance to take a look at her book, Roots and Wings. And it's just such a delightful and so insightful, and talks about how she's done work and family together over these years. Are there any sort of pieces of advice you might have for younger women who are joining us tonight about that?
Well, the subheading of the book is 10 things I learned from motherhood that helped me build and run this business. And I think that's why I wrote the book, is that, growing up when I did in this industry, and when women were working, it was almost a prohibition to be human, to talk about family, to say you were leaving work to take your kid to go see your kids play, or to go to a soccer game, or whatever. And so what I learned over the years is, when you bring your whole self to work, you do a much better job. And there were a lot of things that I learned from my life experience that helped me be better at work. And I didn't want young women coming into this, or men for that matter, to feel you had this binary choice between work and the other things in life. And but it is also an artificial thing to think about it as being a balanced proposition. It never is. And you have to sacrifice more some days, most days, but you make it up in other ways. And so this idea of work-life integration is a subtext of the book, and that's why I did it. But the title itself came from the fact that when my kids were growing up, I had a sign on the wall that there are only two lasting things of value you give your kids. One is roots, values, and the other is wings, entrepreneurship, freedom. because you can give freedom if people understand what the basic rules are.
Mhm.
And so when people ask me, how did you build a business that's in 35 markets, but one culture? And I started to think about it, and it was roots and wings. It was the same exact proposition of the way I tried to raise my family. That you have to have your basic values. You have to agree on those important things in life, and then you can give people freedom in a framework. And that's what we've done.
No, and that's amazing. That a role model within your family, a role model in APCO, right? And really to all the women who are watching tonight who had a chance to see, listen to your words, and also you got a chance to talk with a role model for all of us, Muriel Fox. And so what a delight to have a chance to interact with her. Muriel is one of the founding members of the National Organization for Women, and just a beautiful human being inside and out. And so perhaps Marjorie, you could tell us just a little bit about that experience, and then we could move to the video.
It was an unbelievable experience because, I grew up as a product of the 60s, really, and when women were coming of age and finding their identity and celebrating, I guess, the fact that there were things we could do that we never thought we could do. And I think you've said this before, but to think that women couldn't have credit and couldn't sign for their own houses in certain places and needed, husband's permission, or somebody had to go sign. And then you have Muriel Fox, who was a pioneer, not only, as you'll hear, when she first walked into the Carl Bayer organization and they said they don't hire women copywriters. She walked right in, and she was persistent, and she got that job and became their first vice president, and maybe the rest is history. But it also, I think, was was that spark that said this shouldn't happen to other women. And she spent her whole life really with Betty Friedan and then later people like Gloria Steinem, making sure that all of us would benefit from her early work. And it was really inspiring, because there are days I think we all feel like this is harder than it should be. and that, you get tired of being the only woman in the room. And a lot of that has changed. And hopefully the students on this call will never have to suffer that. But to hear it from such a legend, and to walk through the things that were going on in the environment when I was coming of age, it was just very inspiring.
That's fabulous. Well, she's a great example of boldness. And I'm putting that
sure.
on, I'm putting a Post-it note, Marjorie, right here on my computer. I need that there to keep reminding me to be bold. So I really appreciate.
Well, my other thing that I have on my desk, and that's actually on the wall at the headquarters office, is think big and have passion. And I think that, to me, that's what she stood for. I mean, she thought way beyond what was possible, and she had such passion for it that it just drove her to be successful.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you. I know it's so early in the morning for you, so just what a delight and an honor to have you with us. And we'll watch our interview with Muriel, conversation as well. So if we could have that video, go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Marjorie. It's our pleasure.
This is an interview with Muriel Fox. How do you think the industry has changed over the years?
Well, for one thing, we have a lot more women, and I'm delighted about that. I guess there are more women than men in public relations, although at the top, there are very few people like you who had agencies. But so that's a very big change. And of course, now we have social media, and we have so many different ways of reaching the public. I'm very upset, frankly. I won't get into politics, but I am very sad that communications, I think, has done a lot of harm in recent years. And in the old days, we always told the truth. We may have given our spin on the truth, but it was always the truth. And I think, frankly, nowadays, some public relations people, especially in politics, don't tell the truth, and they don't seem to feel they have to. So there is a change in the way communications is working, but it's probably more powerful now than it was in the days when I was working.
I came of age and went to college in the 60s, and so I'm very, it was very much a part of my life, this kind of consciousness, and the women for the first time feeling a sense of empowerment about maybe choosing a profession that wasn't as or wasn't as common, or things of that sort. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the environment. I think that people don't understand women couldn't maybe sign a banknote or buy a house without a man's signature or a parent. There was so much in society that was limiting.
That's very true. And it was in the 1970s mostly, because now it's founded 1966, the end of the 60s. And thanks to now and the women's movement, and then other organizations joined us. We were happy to have them all join us. Employers used to say, I won't rent to a woman. Landlords used to say, I won't rent to a woman. And we got the Fair Housing Act passed, and we got the Fair Credit Act. Before that, banks used to say, I won't give a mortgage counting the woman's salary, and I won't give a credit card to a woman. People can't imagine that, but the Fair Credit Act changed that, and now got all those laws passed. And most important of all was 1966 Title VII, which said there can be no discrimination in employment or in promotion on the basis of sex. That was the very big one, and I'm very proud that I played a role in persuading President Lyndon Johnson to admit women to the affirmative action. And he signed Executive Order 11246, which added sex to affirmative action, and that brought millions of women into the pipeline. And once women were in the pipeline, they did a great job, often having to work harder and better in order to make it in the field. And so people recognized that women were making a wonderful contribution.
I remember commercials on television with the homemaker, and and just a very different image. Even books for children portrayed women in a very different way, and it took years to kind of make that change. When did you start seeing that change?
Well, you're absolutely right, and this was very important, and we had to address it, and frankly, we had to fight. There were a now movement to boycott television networks that presented commercials that demeaned women, or that didn't hire, or networks that didn't hire women. We had to fight for that, and we had to make the changes. And there were activists who worked very hard. On the subways in New York City, I know some of our people used to put a little sticker that said, "This ad insults women." And that had an effect. I mean, people just did everything they could to make a difference, and they did make a difference.
In this time, in the 50, 60 years that have passed, how do you think men have changed? Because, my experience has been that that the first change I saw in men is when they had daughters who went to got educated, and then they saw themselves the discrimination, even though they were purveyors of discrimination before that.
That's right. The Now Legal Defense and Education Fund had an ad which showed a diploma from one of the women's universities, And the headline was, "Congratulations, you just spent $50,000 so she could get into the secretary's pool." And this was the problem. And people did have daughters, and also young men and husbands wanted their wives to succeed, and they pitched in. But we haven't really come that far. We have a long way to go. And that Gloria Steinem has said it took us half a century to prove that women can do what men do. Now we have to prove that men can do what women do. And
That's a really good way to think about it, I think.
and we have to raise our boys and men differently, show them to be. I'm on a Zoom call. We have to show much better that men do have to do what women do, and they have to be strong in the best possible way of showing their emotions, being caring, and to be a man really means to be equal to a woman, and for the woman to be equal to the man.
And Betty Friedan, who you were working with, became quite the legend, and her book, The Feminine Mystique, which was 1966, just at the beginning of that. Do you remember the public's reaction to the book, and how surprising was it that this was like the beginning of consciousness?
The Feminine Mystique was overwhelming. It came out in 1963, and it made a huge difference. Millions of women, every time I walked down the street with Betty Friedan or sat with her in a restaurant, a woman would come up to her and say, "You changed my life." And we did start raising consciousness. And Betty Friedan, who deserves all the credit as the founder of NOW, the strategist, she created the name NOW. It was her idea. Someone else might have come along, but Betty's the one who did it. She was our energy. She was our vision, and she had tremendous vision, and she really made a tremendous difference. And I hope that history will continue to inform people that it was Betty Friedan who did it, who created the modern women's movement.
So, maybe as one last thing, if you could give advice to those women who will be watching this in the next generation, what would you tell them? What would you tell them from your years of experience and your wonderful legacy?
The future is very good for people who are really capable and professional and goal-oriented. And also, though, you have to work together, and you have to work, frankly, you have to work through organizations, political organizations. And NOW and the other women's organizations are still there, and they still need people to join and to be active. And together, we are continuing to make a difference, and we can't give that up. And frankly, I found that as an active person in the women's movement, I got more respect from the men in my profession because they saw I was a leader and I was part of a leadership organization. So don't be afraid to be a feminist. Betty Friedan used to say, "Well, I resent women who say I'm not a feminist, but I want to be the president of IBM." Well, now we've had a woman president of IBM and General Motors and all the big firms, and it's shown that women can do a great job. And so the future, I think, looks very good.
So I just want to say that thank you for your lifetime of achievement and your hard work and paving the way for the rest of us. And this has been a real honor, and I know your legacy will live on. So thank you very much for your time and your great wisdom.
Thank you. It's been a joy to be with you.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow. What a wonderful, inspirational conversation. And Marjorie, if you're still there, thank you so much for having that conversation and for all you've contributed as well. And I love the call to action, to not be afraid, right? To get out there and get involved. So just wonderful words for all of us to hear. And so we're going to go ahead and introduce some other just amazing people. We have just a great, amazing lineup. I have to thank all the folks at the PR Museum who found a way to get these amazing individuals all together this evening. But we're going to have some time with Grace Leon, who is the CEO of Hunter Public Relations. And Grace, I remember the first time I hosted and emceed this event, it was at your offices right across the street from where I am right now on 23rd Street. So wonderful to have you with us tonight, as well as Cal Curtis, the Senior Marketing Manager at Hunter. So I'll ask the two of you to join us, as well as the founder of Hunter Public Relations, Barbara Hunter, who I got the wonderful honor to just meet briefly along with Muriel at that event a few years ago as well. So it's just wonderful to have you with us.
Dr. Karen, anything you moderate, I'm there, you know, and to be in the company of these women is just an absolute, and listening to Marjorie, who's always been a role model for me, although I don't know her, I love her insights about using motherhood to drive the agency. Thank you for that, Marjorie, but glad to be here. Thank you, thank you.
And a wonderful welcome, Barbara. Thank you for being with us here tonight, and just an honor to have you with us as well. And so, Grace, I'll let you tell us just a little bit about how that experience was in talking with Barbara.
Yeah, you'll see in the video, I mean, she's an amazing, just like Marjorie and all the other women on this phone, she's an amazing understander of our business and you know, a success story for women and an inspiration. You know, she's a role model for all of us. And, you know, as Marjorie is saying, she was breaking down barriers so that we could actually be here where we are today. So I'll let the video do most of the talking, but I think you guys will enjoy it. Every time I talk to my former boss, I get a little bit nervous because she still scares me, but I'm also inspired and I want to keep going just because we stand on the shoulders of great women like Muriel and Marjorie and Mrs. Hunter.
I'm Cal Curtis, a Senior Marketing Manager at Hunter, and I have the pleasure of facilitating a conversation with two true trailblazers, Barbara Hunter, who is the founder of Hunter, and current CEO of Hunter, Ms. Grace Leon. Could you give us a little background on your beginnings in PR?
Yes, I will. I was a staff member of a trade newspaper in the food business. And my sister, Jean Schoonover, who was at Dudley Anderson Utsi, the oldest PR agency at that time, said, you know, you're not making much money. And I heard of an opening at National Dairy Products Company. And so I interviewed there and I got the job as a publicist for Seal Test products, and then the Seal Test Circus, which was live on television. And I worked there for 2 years, but in the meantime, I had gotten married and I had gotten pregnant. And when I left, or when I asked for leave to have the baby, they said, yes, and we'll hold your job for you. Well, when I went back to get my job 3 or 4 weeks later, they said, oh, we filled it. There isn't any job. So here I was with a new baby and a husband that didn't have a job at that point. So it was kind of a disturbing thing, but it was typical of the way men treated women in those days.
That certainly has changed. So not only did women not have job security after having children, but the only leave that you got was in the weeks, like minimal weeks.
That was the start of my career in PR, but I went on from there and got a job in a small PR agency, and then later got a job in a larger one.
And then that larger one led to the company we know today, Hunter. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
I was with Dudley Anderson Utsi. My sister was really my mentor and helped me along the way throughout my career, really. And eventually she and I took over Dudley Anderson Utsi, which was an agency with about 100 people at that time. And the men, many of the men took their clients with them and left the firm, and because they didn't want to work for women, and they didn't want to join us in doing the management of the business. But we built the agency back and eventually sold it to Ogilvy and Mather, and I was there for like 5 years, and then they made some drastic changes and brought in a financial PR firm and made the head of that firm the head of the whole PR operation. And after a short while, he decided that I think my sister and I were too old, too female, and too highly paid, and changed the management, put him in charge of everything. And so we were sort of put out to pasture in a way. So I was not ready to leave. And with the help of an account executive, Karen McKenzie, we had been talking about starting a new company. And we sort of, well, at the same time, a friend of mine, Jerry Cooper, who was a PR manager for an oil company in Chicago, wanted to move to New York. And so we had a meeting and formed Hunter McKenzie Cooper.
I had read about Barbara in my textbooks. And, you know, I had graduated from a university where Barbara's firm had set up a scholarship in the name of one of their most beloved employees. And I won that scholarship. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, I'm on a track to work with Barbara Hunter. So good news is I did end up getting a job right out of school working for Barbara's firm. And I also got assigned the accounts that she was still running, because even though she was the CEO of this very large firm, she was still running the accounts, which is kind of unheard of even back then. So she was on the Tabasco account and I got assigned to the Tabasco account. So it was like gold. I was not only working outside the door of my, you know, like a goddess, but I was also working on an account directly with her. When they went to start Hunter McKenzie Cooper, I was kind of left in the cold because Barbara had left. And I'm like, you know, but then they called me and they said, hey, Grace, we started this little firm down here. And we know you're kind of, you know, loving the big agency life, but how about giving us a try? And it didn't even take me like yet a minute to be like, I'm in, you know, because
We're thrilled.
Grateful to Barbara for extending the invitation.
And I'm grateful to you because you were the cause of the growth of the firm.
Yeah, well, there you go, Cal. So that's how the marriage was made. What doesn't scare you actually built, I mean, it scared me to death, but that's when you know it's right, I think.
And then, so you mentioned that the role women had, and women mostly being secretaries. Can you talk about your experience being at the helm, being a female at the helm of a company when at the time it was not well known or well heard of?
Well, that was much later. I mean, I put in my time as an account executive and then account supervisor and eventually a vice president. And it wasn't until my sister and I took over DAY that we were really the top management. And she was the president first, and I was executive vice president. And eventually I became president and she became chairman. And so it took a long time. It wasn't instant, believe me.
And how do you think, and this might be a question also comparing the past and the present for you to jump in, Grace, but comparing sort of the landscape for being a female executive during that time compared to today, how do you both think that has changed for women?
Well, I think it has changed. I think that there's still a long way to go because there's still a lot of the top executives in PR are men, many of them, but women I mean, when you see the press secretary for the White House being a woman, that's quite a lot of progress there. It certainly shows how much, how things have progressed, but I think still there's more room for improvement. But with the PR field now being like 60 to 80% women, I'm sure that there are going to be more top management people who are female.
Hey, Barbara, tell the story about one of the first acts that you and Jean took when you took over the firm and became top management. It's
the very first thing we did was to look at salary levels and bring the pay for women up to what the men were earning for the same job. That was the very first action we took. And we were very pleased and proud that we had done that. And that was our philosophy throughout our management.
And I think that was a really gutsy move for her to do back then, but the right move. And that's the move that, we try and, as women leaders of today, that's non-negotiable. That's not even a question anymore, because we don't look at gender or age or skin color or anything and determine salaries based on that. But that was, not the norm when Barbara was there. And today, I think that has changed dramatically, which I'm very, very happy about. Barbara, also tell the story a little bit about what was it like meeting clients when you and your sister and some of the other female executives would walk into a boardroom. I think that's also another lesson that I'm carrying forth, and standing on your shoulders to be like, that doesn't happen to me anymore because that happened to you.
Yes, there were instances where we would be called in to pitch for an account, and it would be only a sham that the company PR director wanted to be sure that he involved a firm headed by women, but he had no intention of awarding the business to us. Another time we presented for the public relations program for the city of Little Rock. And we had sent people out there to photograph places and interview people. So when the prospective clients came in, they were surrounded by pictures of their town and heard voices of their people. And we won the account, and I was picked to head the team to go out and get acclimated and so on. And I had to give many speeches to civic groups and so on. And after one of them, I think it was the Chamber of Commerce, this gentleman came up to me and he said, I never thought we would ever hire a firm headed by women, but I'm glad we did.
Well, thank you both. It's very appreciated. Thank you to Museum of PR. Thank you to everyone watching at home. Happy Women's History Month.
Happy Women's History Month. Thank you, Barbara, for all you've done for all of us. And we'll see you again.
You're including me. Yeah.
I mean, you're the OG, lady. You're the OG. Okay.
Wonderful again. What a fabulous conversation, and thanks to all of you for doing that, and just a joy to hear how much has changed, and also to hear how far we've come, and to see different generations in that video all together talking about the important work that Barbara got started. And so thanks for being with us. We're going to continue on this theme here of sort of looking back and looking at wonderful, amazing women who have influenced the field. And I have the delight to introduce yet another woman who is influencing the field, and just a terrific person who I've met just briefly over these years at different events, but I have such respect for her work and for all they do at Elon University, just a terrific program. So Dr. Denise Hill is here with us tonight, and she is an associate professor of strategic communication at Elon University. And she's going to talk to us tonight about Ida B. Wells-Barnett, and just an amazing trailblazer as well in the field. So I'll turn things over to Denise.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to jump right in. Ida B. Wells-Barnett. You know her, a journalist, an investigative journalist, and an activist. And there's been more attention paid to her as a public relations pioneer. And you may wonder, well, if she was a journalist and an activist, how was she a public relations pioneer? She didn't have public relations in her title. She didn't work at an agency. So what was it that she did that makes her a public relations pioneer? So let me share some of that with you. She started her career as a teacher, and then she did become a journalist, a writer, and a newspaper owner. And it was during that time that 3 of her male friends were brutally murdered. They were lynched. And she knew that they could not possibly be guilty of the crimes for which they were accused that led to their lynching. So she was so appalled and so devastated by this that she decided to do some research into lynching and reasons for lynching. So she looked at about 700 to 800 newspaper articles, and she conducted interviews. And through her extensive research, she found that only 30% of Black men who were lynched were actually accused of raping white women. So there was a myth at the time that the reason Black men were being lynched is because they had made overtures and they had raped, they had made advances towards white women. And at the time, there was a big focus on protecting the sanctity of white womanhood, because white supremacists believed that the white race needed to be protected, and that started with white women. And that white race could not be diluted by adding Black blood to it. So it was very important to them to protect that sanctity. However, in Ida B. Wells-Barnett research, she found again that the majority of lynchings were not related to rape. The other thing that she found was in instances where there were relationships between Black men and white women, the majority of them were consensual. So she found that Black men were being lynched for reasons that were as obscure as talking back or making eye contact or being difficult. And what she actually found, the reasons for the lynching were to suppress Black men and African Americans in general, economically, socially, and politically. She also found that it was not just Black men who were lynched, it was also Black women and children. So she took her research and developed a campaign to correct misperceptions about the reasons for lynching. So with a public relations campaign, what do we start with? We start with research. She started with research. If you examine her research, her examination of 800 newspaper articles over the period of 10 years, we would say, looking back at that today, that's a form of content analysis. She conducted one-on-one interviews. She started her plan with research, and she had 2 broad-based goals. One of them was an educational campaign, and the other was to create awareness. One of her strategies, remember our public relations campaigns have strategies, one of her strategies was to correct misperceptions. She used a number of tactics. So she wrote materials. She wrote a number of pamphlets over the course of years that focused on these facts. She also conducted speaking tours. And she went to various groups to speak. One of the groups she targeted, not the only one, were groups of women's clubs. So the women's club movement, white women and Black movement, was very large at the time. And these women's clubs were focused on community betterment. So she went to these women's clubs and she spoke at these women's clubs. And that was one of her tactics. And that is also a public relations tactic, face-to-face communication. And she took information from the mass media, from articles, from research, some of the articles she had written, spoke to women's clubs who in turn could speak to other women. If we look back on that today and say, what is that today? We would say that is using influencers. The other thing that she did is she wrote articles And she also sought publicity. Today, we would call that using earned media. So she wrote pamphlets and brochures. She used face-to-face communication, and she also used the news media. The other thing that she did from a strategic standpoint is she took her message overseas. So in addition to a national campaign, she traveled to England and conducted speaking tours there, 2 speaking tours, one in 1893, the other in 1894, because she wanted to shine international light on the atrocities that were being committed in the United States. That strategy that she used in 1893 and 1894 was later used by other civil rights groups in the modern civil rights movement of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So if we look back at what she did, she developed a public relations campaign focused on creating awareness. She used public relations strategies. She used public relations tactics for her campaign. And here we can see some of the things that she did. She produced these pamphlets over the course of a number of years. She got publicity. Again, speaking engagements, all of these are public relations tactics, and they are tactics that we still use today. And one thing that is very interesting about giving this talk today, so lynching continued in her lifetime. She did create awareness and she did correct misperceptions because she focused on the facts. The other thing that she did is when she gave her lectures, when she gave her speaking tours in the US and in England, the other strategy that she used is she used storytelling. So we hear that today, the importance of storytelling. When Ida B. Wells-Barnett gave her lectures, not only did she share the facts and figures, the statistics, she shared, because she had researched them, she shared the personal stories behind the victims of lynching. So she also used storytelling. So this week, we are in 2022. So this week on Monday, the House passed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. It is now going to the Senate, and it makes lynching a hate crime. So one politician remarked, this is probably the 200th time that a bill has come forth, and every other time, the bill failed. So this time the House passed it, is now going to the Senate, and then we'll go to the president. So if Ida B. Wells were here today, some of her work in creating awareness, the public relations strategies and tactics that she used to create awareness, her last speaking tour was in 1894. And here we are 128 years later with an anti-lynching act that makes lynching a hate crime. So some of what she did, we have to look back and say she did create awareness. She did use public relations in her anti-lynching campaign. So we have Ida B. Wells-Barnett, public relations pioneer.
Denise, thank you so much. What a powerful message that she gave us, and you continue to help everyone to learn that history and how much it affects our worlds today. And so thank you so much. Just an absolute remarkable presentation. Thank you. Our next presenter is Carla Gower. Carla Gower is the professor in the Department of Communication and Public Relations at the University of Alabama and the Planck Center for Leadership in Public Relations. And just a delight to have her here. And not surprisingly and wonderfully, she's going to talk about Betsy Planck. So I'll hand the stage to you.
Well, thank you. And Denise is a hard act to follow. I'm not quite sure I can live up to Denise or Ida B. Wells, but or Barnett. Betsy Planck had a 63-year career in public relations that covered the nonprofit, agency, and corporate sectors. She's known for many firsts, including being the first woman chair of PRSA, and she's also known for her great support of PR education. Betsy started her career in 1947 in Chicago when public relations was seeing significant and rapid growth. She practiced through the social turmoil of the 1960s and 1970s and the changes that those decades brought not just to public relations, but also to women practitioners. In the late 1940s, when Betsy accepted her first job in public relations, she became part of a very select group. PRSA admitted 733 new active members between 1940 and 1952, and fewer than 30 of those were women. The number of women increased over the years, obviously, but women were still the minority of PRSA membership at just 26% when Betsy became the PRSA's first woman chair in 1973. Today, we know that women account for about 3/4 of the field and that men still dominate at the highest levels of the practice. So while Betsy faced more outright sex discrimination than may exist now, how she negotiated the masculine business environment to become a leader certainly offers lessons for young women today. One defining feature, I think, of Betsy's success is that she worked within the system rather than from outside it. I mean, we've heard from Muriel Fox today, who has done amazing things to support women and to really take away that discrimination that so many women faced. Instead of being that sort of activist feminist, Betsy opted to work within the system, worked hard to do a good job and earn her way in a man's world. And as she garnered the trust of male practitioners and developed working relationships with them, they in turn put her into positions of leadership and power. And each time she became the first woman to lead a professional association or a corporate department, it was because a man had sponsored her candidacy for that position. So it could be argued that she was simply the beneficiary of men who were enlightened enough to recognize that a woman could do the job and that she was capable. And it could also be argued she was aided by the feminists who were raising people's consciousness to gender discrimination at the time. And that is certainly true. She was in the right place at the right historical time. But it also ignores the fact that she had been developing her leadership skills over many years and that she was ready for the roles that she was put into, and she was very successful when she was in them. She also assumed some of the positions early on before there was widespread awareness of gender discrimination. Now, Betsy herself would not have described or said she was a feminist. She actually thought of herself as one of the good old boys, and she carefully managed that image. She belonged to very few women-only organizations. She preferred professional public relations associations, and she rarely gave speeches on the topic. Part of her thing was she didn't want to be seen necessarily as a woman, the first woman, for example, in anything. She just wanted to go in there and do a good job. She also believed that the glass ceiling was only there for people who think it is there. A lot of people would think she was naive and overly optimistic for that thought, but she really thought it was in the mind's eye and that it could be shattered if you put your mind to it. She did acknowledge, though, that in the 1960s, women were still on trial in business. She said the burden of proof for performance, the ability to sell ideas and motivate people, rests with the women. And then she went on to say, though, that requires tact, sensitivity, emotional self-discipline, and understanding. Why would women resent that challenge? That those were good qualities to nurture in both business and in your personal life. She also admitted that there were some doors that were closed to her, but as I said, she was an optimist, and so she preferred to focus on the doors that actually had opened instead. She believed it was her choice to enter a man's world of business, and therefore it was up to her to earn the respect of the men and the women with whom she worked. So what lessons does her experience offer to young women today? I think there might be 4 that I'm going to talk about anyway. First is take care of your clients and their problems. In the late 1950s, she went to work for a corporate public relations agency, and she had to take a male colleague with her for the first few times meeting clients because the men were not used to having a woman. They probably also thought a woman didn't know anything about business. But they soon warmed up to her because she didn't focus on the fact that she was a woman. Instead, she really kept the spotlight on them, on taking care of them and solving their problems. And that's ultimately what clients want. Second thing would be focus on transparency and open communication. She really believed in liberal democracy. She believed that individuals could make up their own minds if they were given the facts. She said transparency didn't always mean acceptance, but ideally it meant understanding. I don't have to agree with you, but at least I have to understand where you're coming from. And transparency and open communication are even more important today in this age of mis and disinformation. The third thing, and one I think is really important, she believed that women weren't overly concerned about visibility in their organizations. And she thought that if you didn't make an effort to be visible, then it's easy to get paranoid about thinking, why aren't you being promoted? And why aren't they understanding you're the most wonderful person in the world? She thought too many women overlooked the opportunities to be visible, that they didn't understand the importance of involvement and showcasing their talent. So she said that to be visible in an organization, women had to do 4 things. The first was speak and write well, no surprise there. The second was to seek out and take on responsibilities over and above what you're already doing, because that is how one grows in your career. And one of the Planck Center's emerging leaders has been a real star in her young career. And one of the things is because she's always willing to raise her hand and said, I'll do that, even if she doesn't necessarily know what that is going to entail. She thinks that she can figure it out. She gets outside of her comfort zone, and she's done a really great job because of it. Third thing would be involved in the community. Betsy didn't think that one should really read self-help books or books to develop leadership skills. She thought that if you were volunteered in a nonprofit and really became active in it, served on the board, then that would automatically help you develop your leadership skills. It would also introduce you to influential people in your community. And then also join and become involved in professional groups. If you're a public relations practitioner, you should belong to a public relations association. And my fourth and final lesson, my favorite, she said, if you're going to marry, marry a saint. Betsy's husband didn't expect her to stay at home or fulfill a stereotypical role of a wife. He was a film producer. He worked long hours and on weekends, as did she. So he allowed her to grow and develop. They didn't have children, which certainly helped. She didn't have to worry as much about work-life balance. But by marrying a saint, Betsy was given the freedom to pursue her passion and develop as a leader. And so I think she still offers lessons for young women entering the business field today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carla. Just terrific. Connects back a little to what Margie was saying about, how our personal lives and our work lives intersect in various ways, and as a professional in the field. So thank you. Just wonderful, wonderful. And we're going to have one more presentation looking back on women in PR. So Dr. Rachel Kovac, if you wouldn't mind joining us. Terrific, terrific. So Rachel is an adjunct professor of communication here with me in the City University of New York. Just a delight to have you with us. And she's going to share a little bit about Belle Moskowitz. So wonderful to have you.
Thank you. So Belle Moskowitz was a pioneer at a time when women weren't recognized at all, and before there was even an official term called public relations. And she started out, she's a daughter of immigrants, and she started out in social welfare, community service. She was a child of immigrants, and she was uptown, and she went downtown to the Lower East Side, which was at that time not the most desirable place to be. It was a melting pot. There were many families that didn't speak English, that didn't have any kinds of wherewithal economically or even resources. And she got involved in the settlement house. And the settlement house of choice that she went to was the Hebrew Educational Alliance, where they had all kinds of acclimation programs, assimilation, learning English, learning social skills, etc. And at that time, even though she was, for her age, an educated woman, she had been to teachers college for years. She graduated the prestigious Horace Mann School, and she went out with the objective of being a drama and elocution teacher. She got involved in lives, and she got involved in some of the social problems of that time in the Lower East Side and in the immigrant community, among which one of the greatest ones was the welfare of young women. So what happened at that time is, obviously the conditions in the tenements were terrible, both physically and in every possible way. And the girls for recreation wanted to go mostly to these dance halls. And these dance halls, you can't really call them dens of sin, but many of them were in terms of the norms of the time. And many of the girls were being lured into prostitution or other being exploited in other ways. And she was responsible for looking at their welfare and decided to helped enact, lobbied and went to all lengths to get legislation to protect these girls. It was in that time, the dance halls were places where they sold liquor. They'd get the girls drunk and they'd take them next door to the hotel, and that was the end. And not only did she succeed in getting legislation of the dance halls, but she also succeeded in helping the women who, unfortunately, these young women, some of them were pregnant. It was a shame they couldn't go back to their families. She opened up a home for young women on Staten Island where they could basically learn a trade and learn to be self-supporting, etc. So that was the very beginning. But at that time, of course, it went beyond the settlement houses. It went beyond the industrial conditions. It was about the time of the famous Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, in which over 100 women died because they were locked in these places. It was terrible working conditions. And she basically went to work for the industrial relations. She was a negotiator within, and it was an unusual thing for a woman to do that. So she went in as a labor mediator and negotiator. But even prior to that, she actually used research. She hired people to do research for what was going on in the settlement houses. And they determined, because of what was going on with the young women, that not only was the legislation having to take place, but the workplace conditions had to take place. So she worked for the union for a while. She got promoted and eventually wound up working for the New York State Conference on Charities and Corrections. She was the first female vice president of that. She worked for the Dress and Waist Manufacturers Association. And then eventually she wound up working on a project with Edward Bernays. He was doing writing and editing. He was the editor of the Medical Review of Reviews, which was basically a publication to educate people about venereal disease. Let's be very frank about that, okay? And through Moskowitz, Bernays knew that propaganda could be used for force of good, because she believed that even if you do the most wonderful things in your social setting, nothing's ever going to come to fruition long term unless you have political action. So she saw the need for political action and making political statements and lobbying and working with the people in the legislature in New York to bring about changes, first for the women, then for the industry, and then, of course, in terms of education. So she became a proponent of public relations for the public good. And actually, she and Bernays, it's kind of like they had a friendly spat over who invented the term public relations. You don't really hear about Belle Moskowitz at all. We hear everything about Bernays, but she at her time was extremely active and actually may have preceded him in terms of the use of the term. That's what some of these scholars think. She then went to work for the Port Authority of New York, which had a very difficult time to convince the public about the importance of uniting New York and New Jersey and the benefits to commerce and to all the people, the merchants, that their goods would arrive in a timely way and not be spoiled. And she was a pioneer in using the new media of film for educational purposes. So basically, she worked with radio and film and TV spots behind the scenes. This was not done. She was one of the first people to use film in an innovative way for public relations. When she finished at the Port Authority, she had her only bid for office. She was nominated by Lillian Wald, who, if you know who she was a very famous pioneer in the settlement movement, and also she was one of the founders of the NAACP, and she became very involved in progressive causes and the Progressive Party. So she was nominated for the State Constitutional Convention. She did not succeed, but then she got very involved in the women's suffrage movement with Frances Perkins, who eventually was an advisor to FDR. And she, at that point, met Al Smith and was very involved in his bid for governor. He became governor in 1918 to 1920. She prepared his talking points, and she arranged all kinds of meetings and gatherings from an educational point of view to rally support about Smith. And Smith was controversial largely because he was Catholic. And that was, unfortunately, at that time, a strike against him. People were very afraid of having Catholics in leadership. The beginning of relationship with Governor Smith, as she says, she helped him through the Women's Club agenda. She was still very involved. You know, women got the vote in New York in 1917. It wasn't until 1920 when it was national women's suffrage. And she also became involved with Eleanor Roosevelt that time on a professional basis, not a personal basis, because there was a fair amount of latent anti-Semitism at that time, but she became very involved professionally with Perkins and Roosevelt. And then she continued with working for Smith when he came up against some opposition from William Randolph Hearst, who was competing for the governorship. But and then also Smith was trying to get on the national scene as a Democratic candidate, and she worked for him by getting citizens committees together, again, getting groups of people together to rally for Smith. And she was successful in helping him get the presidential candidacy in 1928, but he lost. When Smith lost the election, Moskowitz and her husband became the heads of a PR firm called Publicity Associates. I forgot to mention also that as a woman, she was very, very involved with her family, but at the same time, full-time involved in her first marriage as a volunteer and a writer. And she tragically lost her husband very early, her husband Charles Israel, the first husband, and then she married in 1914 Henry Moskowitz, who was very, very understanding about her need to get involved in civic matters. And he also was one of the founders of the NAACP. So she and Moskowitz founded this firm in 1928. She worked with they did press relations, they did radio, they did short films. Initially, she had been working only on public interest issues. The new Publicity Associates was in the Empire State Building, and she also had not-for-profit and corporate clients at that time, and Al Smith was still one of her clients. She was very much in favor, as I said, as a country needs to have, this country will not function except through political action. Now, Smith adored this woman, and he thought she was the most brilliant woman that he ever met. And she was described as a trailblazer and the first PR counselor. After her work for the Port Authority, after her involvement with Smith, and her not-for-profit and corporate work, she was very much still involved in public affairs and using progressive issues to raise in the favor of the public interest. As a matter of fact, Franklin Delano Roosevelt thought of in taking her on as one of his advisors, and Eleanor Roosevelt counseled him against it because she was the kind of woman that could subtly influence a man in terms of his agenda. But Roosevelt said, if she gets to be your advisor, she'll do wonderful things for New York. She'll have a progressive agenda, but it'll be her ideas, not your ideas. So her way of operating was basically what we would call a light touch feminism. She kept her married name. She didn't go back to her maiden name. She was happy to have a backseat, not to be in the shining as the star of the show. But she was very, very laid back in the way that she did it, but was very effective in bringing to bear on public interest issues. She was very active in civil rights. She was active in reform for housing reform and everything that we would consider to be a progressive agenda. So her contributions she was once dubbed the most powerful woman in the country, the inventor of the term public relations, or at least co-inventor with Bernays, the mother of PR as applied to politics, and using PR as a power for good, to use publicity to change policy. Unfortunately, she had a very short life because in 1933 she had a fall. The fall itself wasn't deadly, but the complications were deadly. And Al Smith, when he heard of her death, broke down in tears and basically said that she was the most beautiful, the most wonderful, the most brilliant woman that he had ever met, ever met. So I think that she's been largely neglected and unrecognized. As a matter of fact, if you look at the biography of Doris Fleischman, the only mention of Belle Moskowitz was that she happened to attend a dinner that they were at. But if you look at all the other literature, women's literature, she played a very powerful role, not only in women's issues, in political issues, in reform, but she was an excellent, excellent advisor and was able to get through her thoughts and her agenda through peaceful, very, very kind of laid back means, and never ever taking the credit for herself. So maybe that's one of the reasons she's unrecognized. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we had, let's see, Ida B. Wells-Barnett, we had Betsy Plank and Belle Moskowitz, three just bold women doing amazing work in the history of PR. And I just want to thank Rachel and Denise and Carla as well, three other bold, amazing women who are here to tell us their stories. So thank you for sharing that, Rachel. We really appreciate it. Wonderful to have you. Great. And I guess we can just sort of continue with this theme of bold, right? Because I just love, as a good moderator should do, I do my research, right? And it was just a delight to take a look and learn about Dr. Candace Steele Flippen. And she is the SVP and Chief Communication Officer for Acuity Brands in Atlanta. But I love this. She says, I am on a mission to help women accelerate their career growth so that they can achieve the careers they need, they want, and they deserve. So I'm just excited to have her here with us tonight. And I will turn the floor over to Candace. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I was just blown away with all of the stories that we've heard so far this evening. I feel really inspired. I am Dr. Candace Steele Flippen, as mentioned, and I'm a communications executive. I'm also a scholar. And when I think about all the people who have poured into me throughout my career, I'm often reminded of what centers me. And outside of myself and my family, I'm always thinking about the contribution I can make to my profession, to my organization or company that I'm working for, and my community. And that centers and grounds me. And it's a big part of the work that I've been on for the past several years. And so I want to share tonight about how you can think about your career that you will embark upon, which I often call a journey, so that as you think about your contributions, and maybe one day we will be reading and learning about you, I want to share what I've come to find in my research. So about 15 years ago, I was a communications director at a pharmaceutical company, and someone knocked on my door to come in and have a conversation with me about the world that was changing around him. And it was a conversation about the changing demographics in the workplace. And at that time, millennials were coming into the workplace and they were upsetting the apple cart for baby boomers. And then at the same time, later that day, another knock on my door, and one of my many mentors came in to me to say, I need you to speak to some folks on my team. And these were millennials, and they were like pulling their hair out, really frustrated with baby boomers. So I started my journey as a researcher. I went to Case Western Reserve University, where I earned my doctorate in management. And since 2016, I've been a fellow there, researching how to accelerate professional development for Gen X, Gen Z, and millennial, mainly women. And that brings me on a discovery of a few years ago. I was having a conversation with a group of women, and they were really struggling in their career progression. So it looked a little bit something like this. There was one person who was working really, really hard at her profession, but she kept getting passed over for opportunity. There was another person who was really frustrated because she found herself in a role where she wasn't satisfied and she just couldn't break through. So I did a study of about 1,400 women, and I was really trying to understand how can women move their careers along. And I came across 5 steps that if you take them, it can really help you accelerate your career progression. And I validated this through a qualitative study, and then also through a quantitative study, which I'll be publishing very soon. But the work from my book is called Get Your Career in Shape, a 5-step guide to get the career that you need, you want, and that you deserve. So let's get started. Step number 1 is called Save. And that's really about creating a strong financial foundation for yourself. We often think about having a strong financial foundation or financial literacy from a personal perspective, but it's actually very important from a career perspective. And it runs the gamut from everything of having a certain amount of savings. Some people say 3 months, some people say 6 months, but whatever it is for you, so that if you feel that you're grounded financially, then you will feel very confident to take a risk. And that's important for women because we represent over 50% of the non-farm labor force. And we were most impacted because of COVID-19. And so having that strong financial foundation will set you up in your career. So step 1 is save. Step 2 is called hard work. Now, hard work is not something that's unfamiliar to anyone. But what I've seen in my research and what I've seen throughout my career is that women consider hard work as the number 1 step to getting a promotion and the only step. And what I've seen in my research is it's true that you have to work hard. Those are foundational table stakes. But it's also very important that you are aligned with the person who's evaluating you. I'm going to repeat that. You have to be on the same page as the person who's evaluating you. So it's in your best interest when you start a job to make sure you're speaking to that manager, just know what good looks like to him or her, and that you are having periodic checks on your performance so that you are aligned. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with mentees or friends who have worked really hard in their mind and from their perception of what they contributed. And it was probably very, very good in every case. However, their manager didn't think so. So when the time came for the bonus or the promotion or the raise, it didn't happen because that conversation was never initiated. And a lot of times women feel that we will be tapped and noticed, and that's not always, unfortunately, the case. So I recommend, number 2, hard work, get aligned with the person who is evaluating you. Number 3 is around advocating for yourself, speaking up for yourself. Don't choose to silence yourself. Now, obviously, you want to use good judgment and make sure that when you have the conversation to speak up for yourself, that the timing is right. Perhaps you've practiced with someone else to make sure that you have a sound argument to state your case. But it's also around building a coalition around you of people who can support your voice in a meeting. You know, in my research and even in my life, there have been times when I've sat around a table and I feel like I have a major contribution, or maybe these women feel they make a major contribution, and only to have someone else say the exact same thing you have said, but then someone else gets credit for it. And so understanding how to speak up, or maybe having someone in the room where you've shared your ideas who can co-sign for you. It's terrible to have to cope like that, but it's a reality. And so it's really important to know and have your voice. And as PR practitioners, people are coming to us to be sound counselors. So if you ground yourself in that early on, it's a lot easier for you to move forward in your career. Which takes me to number 4, which is persevere. You know, I like to say that careers are journeys, and we have heard some amazing journeys about remarkable women this evening. And during your journey, you're going to have some high moments, and then there are going to be some moments that are going to be low, and you're going to have to learn how to navigate through that. 3 things. Please don't go it alone. Have someone with you by your side, whether it's a friend, a colleague, someone you trust, a group of people you've surrounded yourself with, to help you manage those highs and also those lows. The other thing is really understanding what you want so that you don't quit too soon. And that's crucial because we always may not have perfect information when we embark on our career journeys. And we may think perhaps management or your boss or your manager is withholding opportunity, but perhaps there's a hiring freeze that no one knows about. And you may be projecting your fears or concerns about having the right information. So it's important that you understand how to persevere and manage those obstacles. But at the same time, you have to know when it's time for you to leave, when that opportunity is now no longer in your best interest, and the situation you find yourself in is damaging your physical health, your mental health, your well-being. And so fortifying yourself to make that decision to leave well when it's no longer in your best interest. And then finally, number 5, which is educate. And that's all about being a lifelong learner. Now, in communications and PR, I've had many of my colleagues say, I hate math, that's why I went into PR, or that's why I'm in communications. Well, I have an MBA and I have a doctorate in management. And what I will tell you, communicators and PR professionals, that as you look to grow in your career and you want to do management, math comes along with it. And so I would encourage you to broaden your skill set and be a lifelong learner. Take assessments to help you understand how you show up, your work styles, your preferences, so that you have a full complement of who you are as a person and what's important to you in your value system as you navigate your career. And then the other part of this is making sure that as you're pursuing your education, that you're having a holistic view of how it's contributing to where you want to go. And what I mean by that is, a great part of the experience is what you get from the book learning, but we heard earlier, it's also the on-the-job training. And so you don't always have to just read the book. I wholeheartedly agree that getting those stretch assignments and getting additional information about how you can build your career is important. So let me put it in a nutshell. We're at the beginning of the year and a lot of people think about getting in shape physically. I suggest that as you travel your career journey, you think about getting in shape all the time. That doesn't mean that if you're comfortable and things are great, that you stop. It doesn't mean that you have to move if you're happy. But when you're thinking about your career and the role that you have, ask yourself, is this the role I need? Is this the role I want? Is this the role I deserve? And if not, I recommend that you save so you have a strong financial foundation, that you understand that hard work means being aligned with the person evaluating you. You know how to speak up for yourself so that your voice is heard, that you understand how to persevere so that you can navigate your career journey for the long haul, and that you have the right education foundation for yourself so you're prepared when those opportunities come your way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we all learned so much from what you just had to say. It gives us a minute to start thinking about our own careers, next step, how to evaluate and how to move forward. So just wonderful. Thank you so much. And good to have someone talking about the joy of getting their PhD in research and loving that part and also being in industry. So I just love how you've managed to work in so many different worlds so wonderfully. So thanks to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're going to continue, as Candace just said, with that lifelong learning. Now what we're going to do is spend a little bit of time talking to a student panel. A number of folks who've agreed to join us today and talk about their learning from this panel, their ideas as well. So if I could ask those who are on the student panel to put your cameras on and join us, it'd be wonderful to see you. Well, I'll give the panel a little heads up. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of you, but as I am, think for a second. I'm going to ask everyone to share maybe just one thing that surprised you about the history of women in the field from all these wonderful presentations. So as you take a second to think, let me go ahead and introduce our panel. So we have Taylor Williams, who is here from DePaul University, and he is the PRSSA chapter president. So wonderful to have you. We have Matilda Lindberg, who is here from Baruch College, who's a corporate communication master's student with us. We have Jake Strickland from the UGA School of Public and International Affairs. He's a student there. We have Madison Abrams as well, who's also a UGA student in Communication Studies and Sociology. So wonderful to have you join us. And Ryan Ong, who is a recent graduate of the University of Florida, the Public Relations Department, and currently with IW Group. So just wonderful to have you with us as well. And finally, Catalina Hernandez, who is also a recent graduate of the UF Public Relations Department and currently working at BCW Global. So wonderful to have you all here. Terrific. Maybe I'll just open it up and say, who would like to share with us something that you learned tonight that maybe surprised you or you found really fascinating listening to all these terrific histories?
I can start if that's all right.
Please.
First of all, thank you all who talked, and it was really inspiring. And I think you gave us a hard task to only pick one thing, but it was reoccurring a few times, and it really surprised me how much legislature the people had to go through, and that they actually were, hindered by law to do some of those things. That's something I never really thought about, and it's surprising that we don't know as much about it because obviously, it's a huge thing that took a lot of hard work, and I'm very impressed and thankful those women ahead of me, before me, went through all of that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Matilda. Absolutely. So powerful. Who else would like to share?
I can share.
Sure.
I was fascinated to learn about Moskowitz, and I was particularly fascinated because I know that the professor who invited me, Dr. Karen Russell, that she discovered her. And the fact, as Dr. Kovacs said, that this was one of the most powerful women in America, that she had to be discovered, that she had to be rediscovered, even though she held an extraordinary position, is just so extraordinary to me, because you think that there would be a history recorded of this, but the fact that we're having to go back and rediscover these things was just absolutely fascinating to me.
Absolutely. That need to go back and rediscover and recover history in so many ways, right? It's just so important. Denise's presentation also just really brought home the importance of how that history today, right? Today is still alive and so important. So thank you. Thank you. Anyone else like to share?
I think one of the great things that I heard this evening that's fascinating is just how some of the tactics that were used back then are still very prevalent and being used now. We talked about Ida B. Wells and how she was traveling to, get her message out and creating a global stage for her stories and the news that she wanted to spread. And all of those tactics are still very prevalent today, even though we may utilize them in a more modern way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. It's the connections there between the past and the present. If there's anyone else who wants to join, could I just make one quick correction here, which is that unfortunately Catalina was not able to make it tonight. So Joya, my apology for not introducing you at the beginning, but she's working at Hunter, wonderful, and graduated from SUNY FIT. So it's wonderful to have you here. Wonderful.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Great, great. Any other things that surprised our student panel?
Yeah, I can follow up here. One thing that particularly resonated with me was in Muriel Fox's anecdote about the New York subway and how stickers were placed saying that this demeans women. And immediately I thought about how in modern marketing practices, we're just putting QR codes everywhere in places where people congregate. So all of these tactics that are being discussed are evergreen and we're still using them to this day. So just so honored to be here and learn more about the history.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's talk some more about that in just a minute, because that's such a great connection there. What did you hear that's still alive and well today in terms of public relations strategies? Any other things that folks were surprised about?
I can build on what Ryan said, and it was also about Moskowitz and how whatever she did wasn't counted as public relations, but when she started to talk with Bernays, that's when they actually came up with the terms, and that she's not even really mentioned when they discuss the history of the function.
Absolutely, absolutely. Taylor, did you have something that you wanted to share there?
Yeah, I was going to say with Belle Moskowitz, I think also just seeing how she displayed so many feminine qualities, and we're still seeing that being carried on through today, where if you don't speak up for yourself and advocate for yourself, like we heard, that you just get shoved off to the side, which is so sad to hear that it's still carrying on to today.
Absolutely. And wonderful, wonderful advice that Candace gives us to think about how not to be in that situation, how to advocate for yourself, how to get someone who's sort of co-signing for you in meetings and helping you to get your voice. So that's really important. Thank you. Let's talk maybe a little bit more about, Ryan had mentioned that he noticed some of the comments in the subway saying these strategies are offensive to women, right? What are some of the strategies that you heard either that Ida B. Wells, Betsy Plank talked about, Belle Moskowitz, even some of the comments that Marjorie talked about, or Barbara Hunter, or Muriel as well, that you see are still alive and well today, that are really important?
I would say in terms of Ida B. Wells specifically, the fact that she was a newspaper owner is really important. We talk so often about how women are not in positions of power and women don't have agency in the field, but there are more women than men in the field, like doing the work on the ground on a day-to-day basis. So ownership is really important. I feel like we're starting to see more and more in the present day with women owning PR agencies, becoming execs at firms, which I think is really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love, that notion of taking agency, right? How important that is in your own career. So thank you. Yeah. What else? Other evergreen strategies, things that you heard that you are still alive and well today?
I really like what they said from Betsy Plank, that, we should really, oh, I'm so sorry, that we should really see ourselves as, promoting good work and try to look away from being women, even though we have to enhance that as well, but that we also focus on, opening our own doors, because that in the end will lead to help others also.
Right, thank you.
Building those relationships inside and out of the workplace, even with media, very prevalent today. And we may do it in a different way, whether it's creating a more informal friendship relationship with media, taking them out to lunch, creating experiences with them, and then also building relationships in the community to kind of give you that backing.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Absolutely. Other thoughts?
I was really interested to hear Muriel Fox speak about the need to be involved in political organizations. Obviously, with empowerment comes the idea that we have more individual power, but I think that in order to continue to make those gains, those political organizations are still so necessary today. And I feel like in recent years, we've realized how much we can accomplish through those political orgs.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Interesting how politics and advocating for the good in society threaded through so many of these presentations today. Absolutely. Other thoughts?
To actually build off of that, I think also the importance of conveying that message to our clients, making sure that support is being filtered through our client work as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have one question I want to share from the chat, which came from Karen Russell. Wonderful to have you and to see you. She mentioned that intersectionality as an idea, right, didn't really come up tonight so far. But do any of the students on the panel have any thoughts in relation to how they see intersectionality across all of these different panels?
I thought that, okay, I thought that Dr. Flippin's, the first point in her 5-point plan, the savings and financial foundation, was really interesting, because I feel like in a lot of these conversations, lower income women are so often forgot. And so the need to communicate to them that, money in a lot of ways is what encourages you to take risk. And so I think that communicating that to people is something that obviously will help a bunch of people, but lower income women especially.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes. Matilda, do you want to add something?
No, Jake really covered everything. And I think it was Ida B. Wells who also covered intersectionality when she went through like the whole history and how she had to do research to find those connections and to really promote that and, you know, spreading the word with her different tactics.
Absolutely. And in just to her life experience, right? When we think of intersectionality and how you can use your life experience to make a difference, right? To show others a different perspective. She was uniquely at that point in time, had the skills, the ability, and the voice to get that perspective out. Her life as a Black woman at that time, right? So just her use of her life experience in such an important way is really valuable. Other thoughts on that question?
I just wanted to add, going off of what Jake was saying within the 5 steps, just the concept of hard work and education. A lot of times lower income women, women of color, Black women, queer women, things like that, they have to work harder than other women with more access and more privilege to get to where they want to be. Or a lot of times it's not even a matter of getting to where you want to be. A lot of times it was just a matter of, you know, making money, making a livelihood for yourself, and even education, like what education looks like for one person might look a lot different from another person. And I feel like this really opens up the conversation of equality versus equity. I feel like so often we focus on equality, but I feel like there kind of needs to be a shift, just not only in the industry, but in the world, to focus more on equity, because everyone, like giving everyone the same thing isn't going to benefit them or really help them survive, but we really need to give people what they need instead of just equal everything.
No, thank you, Madison. I think that's so insightful, and it makes me think of how important it is that we listen, right? And we do research, if you will, to learn others' perspective, to learn what they need to bring them the next step. And that's just critical. So well said, so well said. Let me ask this question, which is, interestingly, right, we heard these stories of women being the first early pioneers in the industry, right? And we know that today, the vast majority of women, not in executive roles, but in public relations, most people are women, right? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the fact that today it's a majority women comprised industry?
For me, it kind of goes back to what I was thinking earlier about how I'm starting to see more women like getting in those executive roles, but we heard about how, you know, women who display like if like they're pregnant, they can't do certain things. And I feel that when women get to a certain level, they have to display like masculine qualities, and women can never just be, you know, their self. And so it's kind of balancing that, you know, men are in this position to be in more masculine roles, like strong, and trying to find a way to break through that. I know sometimes like there's a glass ceiling and I don't know the answer to it, but I think that, you know, we have to recognize, and I'm seeing it more, we're recognizing that women are more than one type of person. So I think that's a real thing that we have to work towards in order to get past the barrier of women just being in lower roles.
Thank you. So insightful. Joya, go ahead.
Yeah, to build off of that, I think it's really just important as women continue to grow in these roles and move up for people to realize, you know, we are human. We do wear different hats, mothers, sisters, daughters. And so to be in a space that we're allowed to put those different hats on to help us have a different point of view when working and being able to relate to whether to either our clients or our client audiences is really important. But it is great to see more women in these higher roles. It's definitely something to look up to. Creates big goals for us on the younger end, and just also creates more mentors for us as well.
Well, maybe we try this, which is the flip side of that in some ways, which is, why do you think more men aren't going into public relations? Speculate. Ooh, we stumped them. Follow-up question perhaps, do men, do you think, ever feel discriminated against in the field of PR?
One thing that I have heard from several people in some of my classes is that, especially most of my classes are female, and a lot of the women, they say, you know, oh, I got into PR and my boyfriend said, well, that's what every, you know, sorority girl gets into. That's what every woman gets into. And I just think that that's really interesting that men think that it's sort of, you know, that men realize that it's a female dominated field. And I think that in a way, more men don't get involved because they're threatened by the women-led atmosphere of the industry. In fact, that was one of the reasons that I got involved in PR, because my sophomore year of college, I was really trying to decide between PR or going to law school. And I really settled on law school, or I really settled on PR because most of the connections in my life as a gay man have been with women. And I figured that I could go much farther in this industry just based on those connections and the atmosphere. And so that was really what I decided to do. And I think that that's something that that a lot of men are threatened by.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspective. Appreciate it. Ryan, what do you think?
I'd like to follow up and completely agree with Jake here. I think that I've heard the exact same narrative saying that, sorry, I might be cutting out. I've heard the same narrative saying that, oh, this is definitely a major that's girl dominated and I want to like steer away from that lane. And it is definitely, from my understanding, a boys club coping mechanism in a way, just because of the feeling of being threatened. And I think that we really need to get those boundaries to the side, because at the end of the day, DEI has so many different facets to it. And like to be able to all speak to each other on equal grounds and share each other's perspectives about issues that we have fundamentally different experiences about sometimes. That is like the core of communications in a way. So to be able to open up this space and make people understand that this is not something that is for a specific type of person, but that everyone can communicate. I think that's the most important learning, I believe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. I mean, let's keep going with that. What do we think are some of the other ways that we can break this cycle? We can shift and change the way people perceive the career in terms of gender. Yeah.
One thing that Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
Joya, go ahead, and then Matilda.
One thing that Marjorie said earlier that really stuck with me was that when men and women work together, there are no limits. And I think that's something that is really important, you know, as PR has become an industry that maybe men look at as being a woman-dominated industry. It doesn't have to be that. So to continue to spread that message that, you know, when we can work together, we can create something great. There are no limits. I think that we can stray away from it being just a, you know, woman-dominated and an industry just for women.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, yeah. Matilda, you want to share something?
Oh yeah, I wanted to add a comment and build on really what Jake and Ryan said. And I think in the public relations industry, even though we have challenges and we have been very privileged with great women who like created a path for us. But even though today, when I'm conducting my own research to create my own career path, I do see that the most top executives are men. And especially for someone like me who's looking into financial communications, for example, and even at Baruch College, when we look to the student body, it's women, but most professors are actually men who come from the field, right? So I think it's really interesting what Barbara Hunter said, that it's like 60 to 80% women in the field, but when we look at the top executives, we still need to make our way up there.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. When you think about that's where the starkest gender difference is, right at the very top of the field. Absolutely. Well, let's
say, oh, sorry.
No, you're fine, Madison. Go ahead. Up there.
I was going to kind of build off what Matilda was saying. I feel like a possible reason that this could be the case is because PR is really a field that requires you to be in the arena, I guess, in the words of Brene Brown, and really show up for yourself and show up for other people around you, and not in the traditional sense, but kind of be vulnerable. And most men are not socialized to do that. And in terms of shifting this, I would say there needs to be a focus on contribution instead of judgment. Plenty of men have plenty of positive things to contribute to the field, but I feel like too often people, men and women, just resort to judgment. And if everyone just focused on like contributing, even if it's a small thing, contributing in your class, contributing to an organization, contributing in your job every single day, instead of like, you know, judging or maybe even judging yourself, like just focus on contribution. Things could definitely be different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Well, we just have about 5 minutes left. And so I thought maybe one great place to sort of end our conversation is to think about your own careers going forward, right? So what did you learn today that you really want to apply to your own life, your own career as you go forward? And that could have come from any of the speakers today. So whoever would like to start.
For me, it was what Dr. Steele Flippin was saying about perseverance. And I've always heard perseverance referenced in terms of, you know, if you want something, you got to work hard. You just have to push, push, push. You know, if you do it well enough, you'll get it. But I've never heard it in terms of, you know, sometimes that looks like slowing down, not burning out, and stepping back and, you know, taking yourself away from that task. And so I really want to take that away with me in my career, because I think sometimes that I can open up new opportunities when you realize something isn't for you as well.
Thank you. Fabulous.
I can go, and what I really learned is to not be afraid of failure, because that's what took us where we are today.
Absolutely. And all of those women, right, talking about their successes and their struggles going through, whether it's founding an organization with Marjorie and APCO, or thinking about Muriel and all of the challenges of just simply being able to get the legal right to do certain things, right? Lots of struggles and failures along the way to persevere. Absolutely. What else? What else?
Visibility and advocating for myself. You know, that was a big topic. Dr. Steele Flippin talked about it, and it was also one of Betsy's 4 lessons. And so just really pushing myself to make sure I'm seen, you know, raise my hand, make that impression, and also advocate for myself, and make sure that I'm heard.
Absolutely. And you see Muriel Fox showing how women had to advocate for themselves, right? She goes just to do some simple things in some ways in life, right? You see the story of Ida B. Wells-Barnett and really advocating for herself, for people of the same race, right? Trying to change the way we had perceptions and we thought about. And so advocating for yourself and advocating for others in so many ways. Thank you, Joy. Great. What else?
I really love Dr. Steele Flippin's notion of advocating for yourself as well. That's something that really stuck with me, because I have not in the past always advocated for myself as strongly as I could have. And I also really like Dr. Kovac's message about public relations for the public good, because I am a PR major. I'm also a political science major. And so I've tried to combine those two. I'm very interested in politics, but I'm not just interested in, you know, winning an election or you know, advocating electorally. I really want to make those changes in people's lives policy-wise. And I just thought that that was a really good summation of what I would really like to do with my career.
Oh, wonderful. What a great thing to get the chance to take away. Thanks, Jake.
This isn't necessarily a learning, but it's more of an affirmation of something that I've been thinking about more recently. And it's that education is really a crucial step on the journey to allyship. From all of the stories that we've heard throughout today and from my fellow panelists here, like there's so many experiences and things that could be taken away and learned from, and just growing those learnings and thinking about them more and being critical of ourselves in some ways are just like very essential journeys to like how to be a better ally, how to be a better communicator, and how to be a better professional in general. So yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. Completely agree.
I would definitely say something that hasn't been mentioned that really resonated with me was Dr. Gower's message about really being involved in your community. So often, you know, we want to get our degrees and, you know, go off and do what we have to do. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but I feel like for me, I definitely want to focus on my community and really make my career and the work that I do representative of my community and, you know, where I come from and the people that are like me, because none of us would be who we are without that community. And I feel like that our communities really get lost in the shuffle sometimes. So I really want to not only be involved in the community, but contribute to the community and make the community proud of me. So.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Madison. Each of those women that we talked about in history were in so many ways connected and bringing their communities up, right? But you have to be involved. You have to be there. You have to be present and active in that to do it. Just a delight. Any other closing comments from our student panel? Anything else you learned about women in the field and their history that you want to share?
Well, I really appreciate how we contextualize the one women who made a lot of changes. The whole idea that we might need to look back at history and even, at anonymous people to understand, what role women played in, making that history.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to. You have to look at that context, right? And it'll be wonderful 20 years from now, 25 years from now, right? We'll think about a new time, a new context, and where women and men's roles in the field are. And so just a delight to have all of you here. And I know I join everyone at the PR Museum and all who are here on listening tonight to say just best of luck with your careers. There's so many folks who are here as mentors and have already been, but will continue to be for all of you. So we're very excited to see the next generation of all of you succeeding in the workplace. So thank you so much. And I'll just thank everyone. It was a joy to be here. I believe I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Jenny to close up our panel. But personally, it's been just a wonderful experience to learn from all of you tonight. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much, Karen, for leading us once more and for making this event just as necessary as we need it, to have these conversations that you had with this panel and to just, this is great. I'm just feeling so many different emotions, but we hope you all enjoyed tonight's program and maybe even learned something new about PR history. As we listened to stories of women pioneers of our industry and heard from women who are researching or making PR history today, we hope you also had a chance to consider how we can continue to improve our workplaces, share unheard stories, and make our industry and every other industry a better and more welcoming place for all. On behalf of the museum, I'd love to once again extend a huge warm thank you to our participants and especially our sponsors for making this event possible. They are the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Georgia, Johnson & Johnson, the Bonnie Ablon Foundation, TV One, Renew PR, Page, Hunter, Pat Ford, the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management, Race Point Global, Experian, APCO Worldwide, Jim Lukachevsky, Germander and Associates, Muckrack, and Compro. As someone who walked into this event with hopes and dreams of becoming a PR woman myself a few years ago, tonight was another powerful and motivational evening that I hope you all heard and felt as well. The Museum of Public Relations is thrilled to continue its diversity series programming in 2022, and I hope you can join us for our upcoming events, such as the 3rd annual celebration of the AAPI community and PR with MC and host Bill Amata on May 5th, and our 4th annual LGBTQ+ experience in PR with MC and host Ben Finzel on June 2nd. You can visit prmuseum.org for more information and of course PR history. And we hope you stay in touch with us online, and I look forward to seeing you all at our future events. Thanks so much again and have a great evening.